Today we are going to be looking at optimal product mix decision, and it's a very interesting one, and at the same time, it's very frequent in ICANN exam. So I will take my time to explain the principle, all right? I will give you the procedures that we need to undertake whenever you want to determine optimal production plan. Then we are going to solve several scenario questions. So under this, we are going to solve about 4 illustrations. One will be for regular question. Then we are going to solve a question whereby, or a scenario whereby you are given minimum allocation. Then the third one, we are going to solve a question that involves make or buy. Then, of course, we're also going to solve the fourth one, which is optimal mix involving special order, because under each scenario, there are different ways of determining optimal production plan. So all of this is what we want to discuss today. Of course, there is not how we'll be able to solve the entire 4 questions in this same period. So what I mean is that this will extend beyond today, all right? But in any case, let's start. So what do you understand by optimal product mix? Generally, when you talk about optimal product mix and then linear programming, the two are how to achieve the same objective, which is optimal allocation of limited scarce resources in order to maximize the organization's contribution towards the profits. So because the financial resources, the factors of production required for manufacturing the product are generally not sufficient. So the little the organization has, how they are going to allocate it in such a way that will maximize the organization's contribution is what we want to be discussing. Therefore, what do you understand by optimum product mix? So the optimum product mix involves the process of allocating limited scarce resources among competing product line in a judicious and efficient manner in order to achieve the organization's single objective. Generally, the optimal product mix is used when there is only one constraint. When there's only one constraint, and that's when you use optimal product mix. So when a company does not have sufficient factors of production, when you talk about factors of production, what we simply means is the material kilogram, labor hours, or machine hour. So when those factors of production are not sufficient, company will need to allocate the limited available resources among competing product line in a judicious and efficient manner. All right. So that's the essence of optimal product mix. However, optimal product mix is used, like I said earlier on, when there is only one factors of production. Remember, when you talk about factors of production, like I said, we are talking about raw material kilogram, okay? We are talking about labor hour. We're also talking about machine hour. So when any one of those 3 that I mentioned is not, because when you want to produce, when a company wants to produce, you are going to need material input. You will need material input, okay? You are going to need labor hour. Then you're also going to need machine time or machine hour. So when any of these 3 is inadequate, there will be a constraint. The company will not be able to maximize, or the company will not be able to take advantage of market condition, because the production capacity of the company will be limited to the resources that the company has. So once there is this limitation, the company will not be able to maximize contribution. So what I'm trying to say in essence here is that when any one of these 3 factors of production, either material, labor, or machine hour, is inadequate, Then there is a constraint. When there is a constraint, the company will not be able to maximize opportunity in the marketplace. So generally, what do you understand by limiting factor? What is limiting factor? Limiting factor is also known as bottleneck or constraints, okay? Limiting factor is also known as bottleneck or constraints. It represents anything that stands on the way of achieving an organization goal or objective, okay? Anything that limits the capacity of a company to achieve its goal is what we refer to as limiting factor or constraints, all right? So like I mentioned the other time, there could be production constraints such as raw material kilogram, labor hour, or machine time, all right? Therefore, what are the types of constraints? Basically, there are two types of constraints. One is single constraints. Two is multiple constraint. The single constraint represents a situation whereby only one factor of production is limited in supply, okay? Single constraint represents a situation whereby only one factor of production is limited in supply. So when this happens, the limiting factor, the key limiting factor is used to allocate resources to maximize contribution. I repeat, when there is only one constraint, the key limiting factor approach is used to allocate the limited scarce resources in order to maximize contribution towards profits. But the second one, which is multiple constraint, the multiple constraint arises when more than one factor of production are limited in supply. So when there is multiple constraints, we use linear programming to allocate the limited scarce resources. So I will repeat, under single constraints, we use optimal product mix. That is, we use key limiting factor to allocate the limited scarce resources among competing product line. But where there are multiple constraints, we use linear programming approach to allocate the limited scarce resources among the product line. So these are the things that you need to understand. So if that is the case, how do you allocate resources when there is single constraint? Our focus today will be where you have single constraint, which is using key limiting factor, optimal mix. Therefore, how do you allocate resources when only one constraint is limited in supply? There are about between 7 or 9 procedures that we are going to carry out whenever you want to allocate resources under optimal product mix. However, I can also crash it down to like 6 or 7, depends on the way you want to go about it. But in any case, let's start it one by one. Now, when you are given a question, and in that question, the examiner specifically tell you that, say for example, labor hour is restricted to 20,000, or there are 20,000 labor hours within the organization. So what that means is the examiner has given you a clue on what you should do. Examiner has given you an hint that labor hour represents the key limiting factor. Examiner can also tell you that, oh, material is limited to 5,000 kilograms. That's a clue. So all you need to do is to go into the question and confirm if truly that 5,000 kilograms is not sufficient. So whenever you are given a constraint in the question, it means that it is optimal product mix or key limiting factor approach you are supposed to use. But if in the question you are given a constraint for more than one resources, you are given, say for example, 5,000 kilograms for material, 2,000 hours for labor, 3,000 hours for machine. So what that means is that you are supposed to use linear programming. But again, I've seen the situation, in fact, I've seen in some questions whereby examiner will give multiple constraints, and at the end of the day, only one of those factors of production are not sufficient. I mean, it's not sufficient. So at all time, whether it is linear programming or optimal programming, it won't take you more than 1 minute or two to confirm the insufficiency in those resources, so that you don't just start solving, thinking that it's linear programming because you are given multiple constraints. You just continue to work it and thinking it's a linear program. At the end of the day, you have surplus, you have sufficient resources to produce. So, and that's why it is important at all time that you must confirm the insufficiency in those resources. All right, so now, how do you allocate, how do you determine the optimal product mix or the optimal production plan? Like I mentioned, there are about 7 or 9 procedures. So let's take it one by one. Now, the first step, whenever you want to determine optimal mix, the first step is to identify the key limiting factor. Step 1, identify the key limiting factor. This can be done by comparing the required resources versus the available resources, whether it will result in a shortfall or a surplus. If it's a surplus, it means there is no constraint. But if it's a shortfall, that means that resource is not sufficient. But if there's a surplus, do nothing. There's nothing you want to do again because there is no constraint. If there is no constraint, the company can produce whatever they want, the company wants to produce. So since there is no constraint, so do nothing when there is surplus. But once you have a constraint, you have to find a way of allocating the limited available resources. So I'll repeat again. In step 1, what you are supposed to do is to identify the key limiting factor. How do you identify the key limiting factor? To identify the key limiting factor, you compare the required resources versus the available resources, whether it will result in a shortfall or a surplus. If it's a surplus, do nothing because the company has sufficient resources. But if it's a shortfall, then there's a constraint. If there's a constraint, then you need to allocate the limited scarce resources among competing product line. Then step 2, calculate savings or contribution per key factor. Step 2, calculate savings or contribution per key factor. You all know how to calculate contribution. Contribution is selling price minus variable cost. Okay? To get your contribution, denoted as C, equal to selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. This will give you your contribution per unit. Or you can say contribution per unit equal to fixed cost per unit plus profits. Okay, so these are some of the ways that you can calculate your contribution per unit. All right. So once you are done with your contribution per unit, you then move to the next one. However, before you move to the next one, you know I said that savings slash contribution, you calculate savings slash contribution per unit. At all time, it will be most of the questions that examiner will give to you under optimal mix may relate to contribution. But if it is optimal mix involving make or buy decision, that is when you are only going to have savings. You know, under make or buy, you have savings or deficit, isn't it? The same way you compute your savings or deficit under make or buy, that's the same way you are going to do it under optimal product mix. So whenever you have questions that involve make or buy, limiting factor involving make or buy, so your first step in that case is to first of all determine the product, the component that you want to make internally, and the one you want to contract to an outside supplier. So wherever you have savings, it is that savings you are going to take as your step 2 in this case. Now, step 3 says determine contribution slash saving per key factor. Step 3, determine contribution or savings per key factor. How do you do this? Very simple. Just divide savings or contribution by the key factor per unit. Say, for example, the key factor is material. So when you want to determine contribution per material, that is, you divide contribution by the material, the material per unit, the material kilogram per unit. So that's for that. Then, of course, step 4, you rank your contribution slash saving per key factor in a descending order. That will be your step 4. Then step 5, you need to confirm or check from the question if management has placed priority or given minimum allocation to the product line. At times, because of inadequate resources, because of insufficient resources, management may decide that each product should be given a minimum allocation. Say, for example, 5,000 units. That is, we should produce 5,000 units across all the products. So what that means is that whatever balance you have thereafter, you then need to reallocate it based on your ranking. So you go into the question and confirm if management has given priority or placed minimum or given minimum allocation to each of the product line. Then if you don't have that information in the question, you move to the next step. The next step is to prepare your allocation table. Okay, let me see if I can find the space. Okay, so when you want to prepare your allocation table, there are about 7 columns. Sorry, there are 8 columns which you are going to create the formats. When you want to determine your allocation, say for example, I will just say allocation of resources, or just say allocation table. Create about 8 columns. The first column will be ranking. This ranking will be, as you have done in step 5. You have column for ranking, then the product that you have ranked. Then you are going to multiply, you are going to have the units for each product. Then you are going to have key factor per unit. Then you are going to have total key factor. Then you are going to have cumulative. You are going to have balance. Then you are going to have optimal product mix. So these are the 8 columns that you are going to create whenever you want to allocate. What are you allocating? You want to allocate the limited scarce resources among the competing product line. Say, for example, you have product A, B, and C, and you have ranked them in that order, number 1, 2, 3. So put the units, key factor per unit, cumulative, balance. So whatever it is, the units, so you put it there. Okay. Now, this is the format of allocating the resources. Okay, then. So after this, the next step is to determine the optimal product mix or production plan. So whatever you have here will represent your optimal product mix or production plan that will maximize contribution. However, where you have given minimum allocation, then there are there will be 2 categories of units that the company will, that will make up the production plan. The first one will be your minimum allocation, then plus the addition that you have produced through, that you are going to produce through the optimal product mix you have in this last column. All right. So that's how to determine the optimal production mix. Then final allocation. We determine the profit derivable from the allocation. So let me recap again on the procedures involved in the allocating, in determining production plan under key factor approach. I said the first step is to determine the key limiting factor. And I said the key limiting factor can be determined by comparing by comparing the required resources versus the available resources, whether it will result in a surplus or a shortfall for the organization. If it's a surplus, that means there is no constraint. If there is no constraint, do nothing. Because there's nothing you want to allocate, because the company can produce as many as it wants because there is no constraint. But where there's a shortfall, there will be a constraint. If there's a constraint, then you need to allocate the limited scarce resources among the competing product line. And also step 2, you calculate contribution/saving per unit. And I demonstrated for you how to calculate your contribution per unit. Contribution per unit is simply selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit, or contribution per unit equal to profit plus fixed cost. All right. And I also mentioned that you can only have saving if it is optimal mix involving make or buy decision. So to determine your savings, what do? You compare the supplier's quotation versus relevant cost of making the component, whether it will result in a saving or deficit. So if it's a savings, whichever of the component that you want to manufacture internally, that's the one you are going to focus the resources on. Anyone you want to contract to an outside supplier, the company will not. I mean, it is the supplier that will take care of that. So no need to waste time. Then the third step is to determine contribution/saving per key factor. That is, you divide the contribution per unit with the key factor per unit. So then you rank your results in a descending order. That is, according to the highest contribution or savings per key factor. Then step 5, you go ahead and confirm if management has given minimum allocation or given priority to each of the product line. All right. So in that case, you need to take care of that. Then step next, I said you should prepare your allocation table. So using this table you have on the screen. All right then. So after that, then you determine the optimal production mix or production plan that will maximize contribution. And I said that where you are given minimum allocation, there will be 2 categories of your production plan. One is the initial allocation. Is your initial allocation, because if you are given minimum allocation, so whatever unit that you want to produce under that minimum allocation, that will be your first production plan. Then the second one will be an addition, which using this table, whichever one you have in the last column of this table will represent your optimal production mix. So you add the 2 of them together. So those are the 2 elements that will make up the production plan that will maximize contribution. Then finally, you need to determine the profit derivable from the allocation. So those are just the procedures of determining optimal product mix. So that's all. That's all. So at this point, all we need to do is to solve question. Let me know if you have any question for me before I change, before we go to calculations. All right. So if there are no questions for now, so let's go straight to the calculation. Let's start small. Let's start small. Let's start from this illustration. Like I mentioned, we are going to solve about 4 illustrations. So if I'm able to complete like 2 or 3 today, I'll be very happy. So that means in our next class, we are going to complete this topic. All right then. So who will volunteer for us to read this? Who wants to read Amarachi Botany Company PSC question? Any volunteer? Abiodun, can you read?
Okay, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Amarachi Bottling Company PLC produces 4 products A, B, C, and D with the following information. The personnel department has recently informed management that only 300,000 naira labor hours can be obtained in the labor market. You are required to determine the optimal product mix, showing the allocation of resources and calculate the maximum profits derivable from your allocations.
Thank you very much. That is the question. You can mute yourself. So you can see in this requirement, examiner specifically said that you are to determine the optimal product mix. Determine the optimal product mix, showing the allocation of resources, and calculate maximum profit derivable from your allocation. All the relevant procedures involving under key limiting factor are required in this question. So if that is the case, without wasting time, let me switch. Let me switch to my working note so that you can see the way we'll be picking the question. Picking the variables that we need. Let me know if you can see my screen, please.
You can see it, sir.
All right, thank you. So the name of this company is Amarachi PLC. So the first thing you are going to do in this question, examiner asked us to determine the production plan, the optimal product mix, as well as the profit derivable. You can't just go ahead and determine the optimal product mix or profit derivable. It's a procedure that you must follow. Therefore, the first step that you are going to carry out is to confirm or to identify the key limiting factor. To identify the key limiting factor, I would then say confirmation of insufficiency. Now, in this question, if we go back to the question, examiner has given us a clue because there is no, examiner must give you a clue in the question, which of those resources, which of those factors of production that is limited in supply? Is it labor hour? Is it machine hour? Is it material kilogram? Examiner must give you that clue because if you don't have the clue, there is no how you'll be able to know whether the question relates to. You can see in this question, you are told that the personnel department has recently informed management that only 300,000 labor hours can be obtained in the labor market. So that's a clue that labor hour is a key limiting factor. So, but again, you are not going to rely on what examiner has told you, like in this case, by saying that 300,000 labor hour is limited in supply. No, you have responsibility to confirm the insufficiency in labor hour. And that's what we want to do now. Confirmation of insufficiency in labor hours. Because examiner has given us a clue that labor hour is the key limiting factor. So to confirm the insufficiency is the same format across anyone. Therefore, the first item will be the product. Next will be units. Units produced or sold. Then you are going to have labor hour per unit. Then you are going to have total labor hour. Total labor hours. Okay. Then, what are the products? Go back to the question. What are the products we have there? Products A, B, C, D. Products A, B, C, D. Then what are the units? Let's go back to the question again. Unit for A, 20,000, 16,000, 24,000, 10,000. So 20,000, 16,000, 24,000, 10,000. Let me confirm in that order. 20, 16, 24. Yes, correct. So let me do my table. The next thing we need to do now is to determine the labor hour per unit. Now, when I was explaining, there's something I forgot to tell you. When you want to determine labor hour, in the question, examiner will never give to you key factor per unit. You have responsibility to be able to determine the key factor per unit by yourself. Now, when you talk about optimal product mix or linear programming, the factors of production we are talking about, I repeat, is material kilogram. What this means is that if you are given material cost, you are supposed to convert it to material kilogram. Again, labor hours are required, not labor cost. So if you are given labor cost, you need to convert it to labor hour. So how do you then convert material cost to material kilogram? So when you want to determine, for example, material kilogram, material kilogram is simply material cost divided by material per unit. Per unit. If you want to determine labor costs, labor hour. When you want to determine labor hour per unit, labor hour per unit is simply labor cost divided by labor rates or wage rates. So this will now give you material kilogram or labor hour, because you don't use material cost. You also don't use labor cost. Rather, you are supposed to use material kilogram or labor hour. So in this case, for this question of Amarachi, I want to determine labor hour. I will go to the question, am I given labor hour per unit? In this question, the examiner has given to us labor cost of 6 naira for product A, 8 naira for product B, 7 naira for product C, and then 3 naira for product D. We're also given labor rate per unit to be 1 naira, 2 naira, 1.5 naira, then 0.5 naira. So if that is the case, what are you supposed to do? I need to divide labor cost of 6 naira by labor rate of 1 naira. So I would then say 6 divided by 1 equal to 6 hours. The next one, 8 naira divided by 2 naira. 8 divided by 2 equal to 4 hours. Product C, 7 naira divided by 1 naira 50 kobo. 7 naira divided by 1 naira 50 kobo equal. That should be 4 point something. 7 divided by 1.5 equal. That's 4.7. 4.7 rounding 5 hours. Okay. Then product D. Product D is 3 naira divided by 0.5. 3 naira divided by 0.5. That's 6. 3 divided by 0.5 equal to 6 hours. So if that is the case, I need to get my total labor hours. To get the total labor hours, I will multiply the number of units that I want to produce by the hour per unit. So 20,000 multiplied by 6 will give me 120,000 hours. Next, 16,000 divided by 4. Please bring out your calculator and be giving me the numbers so that we can move faster. 64. Next item, 24,000 multiplied by 5. I guess that's 120,000. 60,000. Therefore, add up 240, that's 364. Here's 364,000. This represents the total required labor hours. So this means that for the company to be able to maximize contribution, the company requires 364,000 labor hours. But we need to compare this with what the company has available. I would then say total available labor hours. We are told in the question that the company has 300,000 labor hours. So the difference represents either a shortfall or a surplus. So the difference of 64,000. So this, because what you need is 364. What you have is 300. Therefore, there's a shortfall. You don't have sufficient resources to produce. So this is a shortfall. So now that we have confirmed the insufficiency in labor hour, we then proceed to step 2. Step 2 says, calculate contribution per unit. Step 2, calculate. Calculating contribution per unit. There are 4 products. Product A, B, C, D. Therefore, I will go back to the question, how do I calculate my contribution per unit? In this question, I don't have selling price. I'm only given variable costs. I have material, I have labor, I have variable overhead, so I can determine my variable cost, but I don't have selling price. How else am I going to calculate my contribution? But in this question, I have fixed cost per unit. I also have profit per unit. That means my contribution will be equal to the sum of fixed costs and the profits per unit. So if that is the case, I will then go and design my table. So I will say fixed costs, profits. And I will have my contribution margin. All right. Okay. So fixed cost for product A is 1 naira. Profit of product A is 20 naira. That's 21. Let's go back to the question and confirm for B. B, fixed cost 231. 231, 2, 3, 1. Then profits for B, profits 25, 21, 15. 25, 21, 15. So here is 27, 24, 16. Okay, so I've determined the contribution per unit. Step 3 says, calculate contribution per key factor. In this case, it will be contribution per labor hours because key factor is labor hour. I will then say calculating contribution per labor hour and ranking. I will combine everything together and then ranking. Okay, so our products A, B, C, then D. I hope this table will contain it. All right. So the first item will be contribution. This is a format you are supposed to use when you want to do that. Then we are going to have labor hour per unit. So we are going to have contribution per labor hour. Then, of course, we then have ranking. Okay, then. So, all right. So, contribution of A is 21, 27 for B, 24 for C, then 16 for D. Labor hour per unit that we've computed above in step 1, 6, 4, 5, 6. 6, 4, 5, 6. So to get the contribution per labor hour, just divide contribution by the labor hour. Therefore, here will be 21 divided by 6 equal to, what do you have? 21 divided by 6, what do you have?
3.5.
3.5. Then 27 divided by 4.
6.7.
2.7. Did you say 2.7? No.
6.75.
6.8. 6.8. Next, 24
4.8.
divided by 5. 4.8. 4.8. Then 16 divided by 6. That's 2 point what?
2.7.
2.7. So at this point, I need to rank my results in a descending order. So I will then say ranking. So according to the highest contribution per labor hour, the highest is product B, right? Product B is the first, second, third, then fourth. That's that. So after my ranking, the next thing I need to do is to confirm from the question if management has given priority or placed minimum allocation for the product line. In this question, we don't have that option. Therefore, you move to the allocation table. Step 4, allocation. I will not call it allocation table. So since I know what I want to do, I'll just say allocation of 300,000 labor hours. So the first item will be the ranking. Products. Units. Labor hour per unit. Total labor hour. Cumulative. Balance. Optimal product mix. Okay. So there are 4 products. So that means we have 4 ranking. 1, 2, 3, 4. So according to our ranking, the highest is product B. So I would then say B followed by product C, BCAD, BCAD. That's our ranking. Next, we go back to the question. What's the number of units for product B? Product B, we have 16,000 units. Please call it for me. 16,000. What's the unit for C?
24,000.
24 for C.
20,000 and 10,000.
20,000 and 10,000. Thank you. I get that, Abiodun.
Yes, sir.
All right then. So labor hour per unit. We've already determined labor hour per unit from our first step. So 6, B is 4. B is 4. C is 5. 5, then 6, 6. Total labor hour. Therefore, now we want to allocate. So you want to allocate 300,000. Then your allocation must be based on your ranking. The first ranking is product B. Therefore, 16 multiplied by 4. 16 multiplied by 4, we got 64,000. We got 64,000. Therefore, you need to ask yourself, can 300,000 accommodate 64,000 hours? Yes. I will then put down 64. Being the first one, that will be the cumulative will be 64. So 64 minus 300,000 will give me 236,000. That's the balance after the first allocation. Then finally, for B, I need to ask myself, in determining the optimal product mix, that is, how many units of product B am I going to produce? Certainly, since there is no restriction in allocating the 64,000 hours for product B, then the company will produce the entire 16,000 units. So here will be 16,000. I'm done with product B. I'll move to the next highest ranking, which is product C. 24,000 multiplied by 5 will give me 120,000. Can 236,000 accommodate 120,000? Yes. Therefore, I'll put it down. 120,000. 120,000 plus 64 will give me 184,000. 184 minus 300,000 hours will give me 116,000. Therefore, how many units of product C is the company going to produce? Since there is no restriction for product C, we are going to produce the entire 24,000. Move to the next one. Product A is the next highest ranking. 20,000 multiplied by 6 will give me 120,000. But the balance we have available after allocation to C is 116,000. Therefore, we don't have 120,000 hours. You cannot give what you don't have. Therefore, you have to restrict it to what you have, which is 116,000 hours. Cumulative, 116,000 plus 184 will give us 300,000. Balance, 300 minus 300 will give 0. Therefore, how many units of product A is the company going to produce? Of course, we need to divide the hours available of 160,000 by the hour per unit. So I would then say A equal to 116,000 that we have allocated to product A, 116,000 hours divided by hour per unit of 6. What do you have? I will say 116,000 divided by 6 equal 19,000. We are going to produce 19,333 units. So here is 19,333 units. So nothing to produce for product D because we don't have sufficient labor hour. So step 5 now, I need to determine the optimal product mix. So step 5, optimal product mix or production plan. So I have products, then units. Products A, B, C. We are not producing anything for D, so you ignore D. We don't have resources to produce for D. Therefore, how many units of A are we producing? We are producing 19,333 units. 19,333. B, we are producing 16,000 units. Then 24,000 for C. So we have determined the production plan that will maximize contribution. So finally, examiner is asking that we should determine the profit derivable, number 6. So to determine profits, it simply means you need to prepare the income statement because it is the income statement that will show the profit or loss. So only products A, B, and C will be produced. Then total for the entire organization. So the first item here will be the production plan. In this case, for A, we want to produce 19,333 units. B, we are producing 16,000 units. Then 24,000 units for C. Then you need to multiply this with contribution per unit. Now, in the question, because you already will have profits, examiner has given to us profits of 20 naira, 25 naira, 21 naira, and 15 naira for each of the products. So there is no need for you to put contribution here again. So just determine the profits. So I would then say profits per unit. 20 naira. Let me confirm. 20, 25, 21. 20 naira. 25, 21. Okay. So let's determine the total profits. Total profits. So 19,000 multiplied by 20 naira. What do you get? 19 multiplied by 20, what do you get?
386,660 naira.
386.
660 naira.
Okay, 386, 660 naira. Then 16,000 multiplied by 25.
400,000.
400,000. Let me add the three of them together. 386,600 plus 400,000 plus 504,000.
1,290,660 naira.
Thank you. So I would then say the profit derivable, according to the question, you are asked to determine the optimal product mix, showing the allocation of resources and calculate maximum profit derivable from your allocation. I would then say the maximum profit derivable, the maximum profits derivable from the allocation is 1,290,660 naira. That's it. You can see it's not difficult. Just master the procedures. That's it. That's the end of the question. This is what the examiner wants you to do. You asked to determine the optimal mix. We have done that. We also have to determine the profit derivable. We have done it. So let me know if you have any question for me before we move to the next illustration. So far, so good. Only Abiodun has been talking. None of you has participated. Pascal, are you online or you are sleeping? Emmanuel, Sam, everyone, you have not been participating. I've been asking questions, asking you to give me number. All of you, you refused, except Abiodun. No worry. I believe you are going to do well. You contribute in the next illustration. So in the absence of no question, let's move to the next one. All right. So I will stop sharing this and move to the, okay. Sam, you want to ask questions?
Yes, sir. Yeah, my question is, what if we are given sales and variable costs? That will be contribution. So how do we now sort out the income statements?
For you to
Are we
get
going
your
to make use of
contribution.
it?
That is,
Yeah, okay. Are we going to make use of
in
the
the same,
contribution per unit or profit?
of course, it depends on the, the way the question is being framed. If you are given in the question, if you are given contribution per unit, or if you have calculated contribution per unit, you don't have profit there, then of course you are going to multiply your contribution per unit with the your production plan to get your total contribution. Then you less your period cost. All right. No worry, you are going to see a similar question like that. In fact, that's what we want to do now. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So let me stop sharing this and move to the next illustration. Victor, Ololade, Adeyinka, William, all of you, okay. Gabriel, Funke, Osana, you're all welcome. Majority of you came late. No worries. Let's move on to the next illustration. Yes, let's have illustration number 2. In this illustration, you have minimum allocation. When you are given minimum allocation, how do you treat it? So let's go through it together. Yes, let me call one of you to read. Tony, please, can you read? Anthony. Anthony, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, sir.
Please read.
Okay. Say Panama Manufacturing Company Limited is currently preparing the budget for the year ending 31st December 2024. The company manufactures and sell 3 products: Alpha, Red, Beta, and Sigma. Now, the unit selling price and cost structure of each product is budgeted as follows. already given tables there. Now, then I said direct labor rate is budgeted at 6 naira per hour and fixed costs at 1.3 million per annum. The company has a maximum production capacity of 2 to 8,000 direct labor hour. A meeting at the board of directors has been convened to discuss the budget and to resolve the problem as to what was this?
The quantity.
The quantity of each product which should be made and sold. The sales director presented the result of the recent market survey, which reveals that the market demand of the company product will be as follows. Given.
The production director.
Production director proposed that since CIMA only contributes 12 naira per unit, the product should no longer be produced, and the surplus capacity should then be transferred to produce additional quantities of alpha and beta. The sales director does not agree with the proposal. CIMA is considered necessary to complement the product range and to maintain customer goodwill. If CIMA is not offered, the sales director believes sales of alpha and beta will be seriously affected. After further discussion, the board decided that a minimum of 10,000 units of each product should be produced. The remaining production capacity will then be allocated so as to achieve the maximum profit possible. That's required. Prepare a budget statement which clearly shows the maximum profit which could be achieved in the year ended 31st December 2014.
Thank you very much, Tony. I can see that you have a constraint to some extent. Maybe the font is tiny. Maybe you are using font, but I don't know. But again, thank you. Pardon?
I'm using the phone.
I can see the way you are. Yeah, I can see the way you are reading. It's like yeah, you struggle to. It's okay. Thank you. Yes. So you can see from this question, examiner asks us to determine or to prepare a budget statement which clearly shows the maximum profits which could be achieved in the year ending 31st December 2014. This requirement does not tell me whether this question is optimal product mix. Examiner just tell me to determine, to prepare a budget statement that will show profits, all right? Because I would then need to ask myself, what am I supposed to use, or what am I supposed to do to prepare the budget statement? Now, when Tony was reading the question, you can see we are told in the paragraph after the first table that the direct labor rate is budgeted at 6 naira per hour and fixed cost at 1.3 million naira per annum. The company has a maximum production capacity of 228,000 direct labor hours. So that's a clue. Examiner has told me that there's a constraint in direct labor hour. That is, direct labor hour is limited to 228,000. So that's a clue for me to know that this is an optimal product mix. So if that is the case, so since it's an optimal product mix, therefore, I need to determine the production plan that will maximize the contribution of the organization. Not only that, I also need to determine the profit derivable from this allocation. That's what examiner wants us to do. So again, when Tony was reading the question, I highlighted a comment whereby you are told in the last paragraph that after further discussion, the board decided that a minimum of 10,000 units of each product should be produced. The remaining production capacity will then be allocated so as to achieve the maximum profit possible. So what this means is that we are going to give a minimum allocation to each of the products, alpha, beta, and sigma. So without wasting more time, let me stop sharing this and move to the main, to the working notes, so that quickly we can solve the question together. Okay, so illustration number 2. So the name of this company is Panorama Limited. First step is to confirm the insufficiency in direct labor hour. So I will say confirmation, because you don't believe what the examiner has told you that 2228 is the direct labor hours available. So you need to confirm that. Confirmation of insufficiency in direct labor hours. Okay. We have products, units, then labor hour per unit, is the same format. So we have total labor hours. So we have products alpha, beta, then sigma. So we are going to have total required labor hours, then total available labor hours. So again, we are going to have whether a shortfall or a surplus. Let's keep that one for the last one until we get the answer. Okay. Right. So let's go back to the question. What are the units? 24,000, 12, then 60. 24,000, 12, 60. 12, 60. Let us determine labor hour per unit. So let's go back to the question and identify labor costs and labor rates. In the question, we are given a labor cost, 24 naira for alpha, 48 for beta, 6 naira for sigma. You are now told that direct labor rate is budgeted at 6 naira per hour. Therefore, 24 naira divided by 6. Here is 24 naira divided by 6 naira equal to 6 hours. Next, 48 divided by 6. 48 divided by 6 equal to 8 hours. 6 divided by 6, 1 hour. Therefore, let's multiply. Let's multiply. 24 multiplied by 6. What do you have?
96.
96,000. 12 multiplied by 8.
96,000.
96,000. 1 multiplied by 60,000 will give us 60,000. When you add up, what do you get? This should be 252,000. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right then. So with this, I need to compare with,
Sir, I think, sorry, sir, this is Tolulope. I think
okay,
the 24 divided by 6 is
4.
wrong.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
it's 4 hours.
Yeah, you are correct. Thank you. So 4 multiplied by 24 is still 96. All right then. Okay. So you need to compare this. You compare the 252,000 labor hours with the available labor hours of 228,000. So 228,000. The difference is what? That's 24. So that 24 is a shortfall. That's a shortfall because you need 252,000 labor hours, but the company has only 228,000 hours. So that's a shortfall of 24,000 hours. So meaning that there is a constraint. The company cannot maximize contribution fully. So I'll then move to step 2. Step 2 says you should calculate contribution per unit. Okay, I can then say contribution per unit. Products alpha, beta, and sigma. So how am I going to calculate my contribution per unit? I will go back to the question. In this question, I have selling price. I also have variable cost. Total variable cost per unit is 60 naira for alpha, 60 naira for beta, 20 naira for sigma. Selling price for alpha is 100, 124, then 32 naira for sigma. All right then, so let's calculate our contribution. 100 minus 60. Selling price 100, variable cost 60. Then for beta 124, then 32. 124, 32. Then variable cost for beta and sigma 60, 20. The difference represents contribution we are looking for. So contribution 40 naira, 64 naira, and then 12 naira. So which is consistent with the situation, the proposal in the last paragraph there. So in the last paragraph there, we are given 12 naira for contribution for SEMA. So our calculation is consistent with that. Then step 3. Step 3 says calculate contribution per key factor, that is contribution per labor hour. Contribution per labor hours. And then ranking. I will add it to that. So I have products alpha, beta, then sigma. contribution, labor hour per unit. Contribution per unit is 40, 64, then 12. Labor hour per unit is 481. 481. Therefore, contribution divided by labor hour. Contribution per labor hour. This will be 40 divided by 4 equal 64 divided by 8 equal 12 divided by 1 equal. So what do you have? 40 divided by 4?
10.
That's 10.
64 divided by 8?
8.
12 divided by 1 will be 12. Therefore, we need to rank this. Ranking. So based on our contribution per labor hour, the highest ranking is product sigma. Sigma is first, followed by alpha, second, then beta is third. So, step 4. In this question, examiner said that we should give minimum allocation of 10,000 units for all the products. Therefore, I would then say minimum allocation. The essence of this minimum allocation is for us to be able to determine how many labor hours will be allocated for each of the products. Then the balance of the labor hours available will then be redistributed. So, again, I have products, allocation, that's the minimum allocation, 10,000 units. Minimum allocation. After that, labor hour per unit. Then total labor hour required for the minimum allocation. So products alpha, beta, and then sigma. 10,000 units across. Hour per unit for alpha, I think 481, 481, yeah? 481. So to get the total labor hours, 10 multiplied by 4 will give us 40,000 hours. 80,000 hours, 10,000 hours. When you add it together, that's 130,000 hours. So out of 228,000 hours available, we have given out 130,000 hours. The balance is what that will be redistributed based on the ranking. So total allocated labor hours. Total available labor hours, 228. What's the difference? The difference should be 98,000. So that's the balance available or surplus. The balance So it is this balance you are going to reallocate out based on the ranking. So out of 228,000 direct labor hours, we have allocated 130,000 hours. So we are left with 98,000. So I will then go to the next step. Next step is step number 5. Allocation. We want to prepare our allocation table. And this allocation will be based on 98,000 hours. So allocation of 98,000 direct labor hours. Okay. So ranking. Products. Units. Labor hour per unit. Total labor hour. Cumulative. Balance. Optimal product mix. Okay. So there are 3 products. First ranking, second, and third. Okay. So which product is number 1? Based on our ranking, the highest ranking is product CAB. 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 Units for C. Number of units for C. Remember, the total units required for product C is 60,000. Let me see. Yes, Siemens require 60,000 units. Out of the 60,000 units, we are given a minimum allocation of 10,000 units. So we are left with 50,000. So it is 50,000 we are going to put here. Please, you have to watch out for this kind of a question so that you don't make mistake and giving out 60,000 units again. Because out of the 60, we've already allocated minimum of 10,000 units. Again, for product A requires how many units? 24,000. Out of the 24,000, 10,000 units is allocated already. So we have 14,000 units left. Product B require 12,000. 10,000 is allocated already. We are left with 2,000 units. That's that. So with this, we need to get labor hour per unit. Labor hour per unit is for C is 148. 1, 4, then 8. $98,000 can accommodate 50. So you write down 50,000. Next, cumulative being the first one, 50,000. 50 minus 98, 48,000. How many units of product C are we going to produce? 50,000. All right. So the next highest ranking is product A. 14,000 multiplied by 4. What do you get? 14,000 multiplied by 4.
6,000.
56,000. We have a balance of 48,000. 48 cannot accommodate 56,000. Therefore, we have to restrict to what we have. What we have is 48,000. 48 plus 50 will give us 98,000. 98 minus 98 will give us 0. Therefore, how many units of product A are we going to produce? That should be 14,000. No, that should be 48 divided by 4. That's 1, 2. That's 12,000. This is what I'm trying to say for A. To know how many units of product A you are going to produce, you have allocated 48,000 hours. You divide it by the hour per unit of 4 hours. So this should give you 12,000 units. That's that. Step 6. You need to determine optimal product mix. Optimal product mix or production plan. Because we have a minimum allocation, so we are going to change these formats. So here will be alpha, here will be products. Product alpha, beta, then sigma. So we have minimum allocation. Minimum allocation of 10,000 units across board. Then there's an additional allocation. Addition. So for alpha, we are producing additional 12,000 units. Beta, we are not producing anything, nothing for beta. Then for sigma, additional 50,000. Therefore, we have our optimal production plan that will maximize contribution. Production plan, 22,000, 10,000 units, 60,000 units. Okay, so finally, we need to determine the profits derivable. Step number 7, I would then say income statements. So examiner call it budget statements. It's the same thing. Budgets, statements. So we have product alpha, beta, sigma, then total for the entire organization. So production plan. So we have production plan. I will then go back to the question. I think we have calculated contribution margin. Earlier on, we calculated contribution margin for 40, 64, then 12 naira for alpha, beta, and sigma respectively. So if that is the case, we need to calculate our total contribution. So contribution per unit, total contribution. Again, I need to go back to the question. Am I given fixed cost? If I'm given fixed cost, then I need to determine my profit per, I need to determine my total profit derivable. So we are told in the question that fixed cost of 1.3 million naira per annum. Therefore, let's determine, we are going to less fixed cost from the total contribution. Then this will give us the profit derivable. Okay. Right. Okay, so the production plan, 22,000 for alpha. Here is 22,000. Beta is 10,000. 60,000 for sigma. Contribution per unit is 40. Let me confirm. Yes, 40, 64, 12. 40 naira, 64 naira, 12 naira. So multiply. This should be 880,000, 640,000, 720,000. Please add the three numbers together. Add the three numbers together. What do you get?
2,240,000.
2,240,000. So we are going to less. You are not going to distribute the fixed cost among the products. If you do that, that's not probably, it's not an offense, but you don't need it. It is the total for the organization that you want to determine. Therefore, I will less period cost of 1,300,000. The difference should be 900 and what? What's the difference? Yes.
940,000. 940,000.
40,000. That's the profits. That's what the examiner asks you to do. So I would then say the profit derivable, the maximum profit derivable, according to the question, you have to prepare a budget statement which clearly shows the maximum profits which could be achieved in that period. So I would then say the maximum profits achievable, the maximum profits achievable is 940,000 naira. For the period ending, if you like, you can say for the period, for the year ending 31st December 2014. For the year ending 31 of December 31, 2014. That's it. That's the end of the question. Let me know if you have any question before we move to the next one. So we still have about an hour plus. So let's have one more illustration. So any questions so far? Do you have any question for me?
Sir, I have one question.
Talk to me.
My question is, the first one is the profit we are getting now, the maximum profit. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to look at the interpretation. Is it on the shortfall of the 24,000 hours?
The
I'm
profit
trying to
is
look at how the interpretation of everything that this maximum profit you are trying to calculate now, is it because of the constraints? Is it the constraint value or the whole of the labor hours?
profit is not determined because of see. When you are asked to determine the profit derivable, remember when we started, we said that because the company does not have sufficient factor of production, therefore the little that the company has will need to be allocated in such a way that will enable the company to maximize contribution towards profits. So this is the maximum profit derivable by the organization from this allocation, meaning that if the company produces 22,000 units of alpha, 10,000 units of beta, 60,000 units of sigma, the profit the company will get from the sales of those units is 940,000. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's have one more illustration, please. Now, we have two more illustrations. So let's solve additional one where you have make or buy. Let me see if this is the one that has to do. Yes, here we have suppliers quotation. Okay. So I need somebody to read this illustration number 3 for us. Some of you have disappeared again. No problem. Chidima, are you on? Are you available to read, please? Chidima. Chidima, are you available? Okay.
Okay, all right.
Oh, please go ahead. Thank you.
Kentucky Nigeria Limited manufactures agricultural equipment and is preparing its budget for the year 2015. An initial review shows that it will not be able to manufacture all requirements for component A, B, C, and D because the normal metal processing capacity of 20,000 hours would be exceeded. The company can choose between the alternative course of actions given below to obtain the production capacity. A, to buy entirely from outside suppliers. B, to buy outside suppliers and or use a partial second shift. The data given below are for the year 2015. Direct material for ABCD, 9.25, 6.75. Okay. Direct expenses relate to the use of metal presses, which costs 250 kobo per machine hour to operate. Fixed overhead is absorbed as a percentage of direct wages. Quotations obtained from outside suppliers based on the current marketing research indicates a willingness to manufacture all or any part of the total requirement at the following prices, each delivered to the factory. Additional information reveals that second shift operation would increase direct wages costs by 25% over the normal shift and fixed overhead by 250 naira at each 1,000 second shift hours worked. You are required to 1. Demonstrate the insufficient capacity is available to meet the company's total requirements and to identify the extent of shortfall. 2. Determine the optimal product mix of the components to be produced, given that only 20,000 hours of pressing time are available. And 3. Ascertain whether any of the components could be produced on a second shift operation or bought from outside.
Thank you very much. That is the question. That's the question. So examiner is asking you to demonstrate the insufficient capacity is available to meet the company's total requirements and to identify the extent of shortfall. Now, when you look at this question, examiner has given you supplier's quotation. You have been given a supplier's quotation. So once you have a supplier's quotation, it means that this is limiting factor involving make or buy. How would you know it's a limiting factor? Examiner has also told you in the question that in the first paragraph, you are told that normal metal processing capacity of 20,000 naira will be exceeded. What they have, the normal metal presses hours available in this organization is 20,000 hours. So if that is the case, what are you supposed to do? Now, pay attention, please. When you have limiting factor involving make or buy decision, our procedures, earlier stated, will be slightly different, because when you have limiting factor involving make or buy, the first thing you need to do is to ascertain the components or the products that will be manufactured internally. Then you also identify those that will be contracted to an outside supplier. So the resources, the limited scarce resources that the company has, will then be used to focus on those ones that the company wants to manufacture internally. Anyone you want to produce from outside supplier, you don't have to do anything with it. So you allow the suppliers to do that on their on his own. All right then. So without wasting more time, I will stop sharing this and move to the working note so that quickly we can complete this question and close the class for the day. All right. Illustration number 3. Illustration number 3. This is Kentucky. So, Kentucky Limited. So, like I said, because this is limiting factor involving make or buy, your first step is to ascertain which of the components the company will manufacture internally and which one will be contracted to an outside supplier. Therefore, my first step will be to determine savings or deficits from making the components. So savings / deficits from making the components. So I have component A, B, C, then D. So first item will be the supplier's quotation. Supplier's quotation. I will then go back to the question. What's the supplier's quotation for component A? 15 naira. 15 naira for A. 14.75. C. 13 naira. 13 then 42. So I will compare this with relevant cost of making the components internally. So in the question, we have direct material, direct labor, then direct expenses. Direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. Fixed overhead is not relevant, so you ignore. So direct material, 9.25. 9.25. Please call the number for me.
6.75.
Okay.
6.25.
6.25.
11 naira.
7.
11.
11 naira. Okay. Then direct labor.
2.50.
2.5.
2 naira.
2.
5.50. 5.50, 10 naira.
5.5, and then 10. Direct expenses,
0.50,
2.5,
5 naira,
okay,
2.50,
2.50,
15 naira.
15 naira. So let's add up all the relevant costs. Add up all the relevant costs. 9.25 plus 2.5 plus 2.5. That's 14.25. 7 plus, that's 13.75. 8, 14.25. Then 36. That represents the total relevant cost. So we need to compare this. Relevant cost, total relevant cost per components. So we need to compare this, which is B. We compare this with supplier's quotation, whether we have savings or deficits. Okay, so I would then say savings or deficits. $15 minus 14.25, that is A minus B. Let me write this. A minus B, 15 minus 14.25, that was 0.75. Do the rest.
One naira.
Yes, 1 naira,
1.25 deficits.
1.25 negative,
6 naira.
6 naira. Thank you, Biodu. Now, we have determined savings or deficit. The next thing we need to do is to make a decision. Decision. Supplier's quotation for products for component A is 15 naira, something that costs you 14.25. Somebody wants to give it to you at 15 naira. What do? You make, right? Again, relevant cost of 13.75 is lower than supplier's quotation. You make. Relevant cost of 14.25 is higher than supplier's quotation of 13 naira. You buy. Component D, relevant cost of 36 naira is lower than supplier's quotation of 42. You make. Therefore, we have identified the component to be manufactured internally and the one to be bought from outside supplier. I can then move to step 2 now. Step 2 is to confirm that there's insufficiency in metal prices hour. I would then say confirmation of insufficiency in metal presses hour. So components A, B, D. Please, we are less concerned with component C because component C, you are buying it from outside supplier. So the company will not waste its resources to produce component C. Component C results in a deficit. So total required metal presses hour. Total available metal presses hour. Okay. So after this, we have the units. We have metal presses hour. Per unit. Then we have total metal presses hour. Okay then. So what are the units? Let's go back to the question. 2000, we have requirement in unit 2000, 35, then 28. 2000, 35, 28 for D. Let's determine metal presses hour per unit. You are told in the question that after the first table that direct expenses relate to the use of metal presses, which cost 2 naira 50 kobo per machine hour to operate, which means that for you to get your metal presses hour per unit, you are going to divide your direct expenses with 2 naira 50 kobo, because you are told in the question that direct expenses relate to metal presses hour. So in that case, I would then say for products, for component A, 2 naira 50 kobo divided by 2 naira 50 kobo. That's equal to 1 hour. Okay. Then for component B, 2 naira, direct expenses of 5 naira divided by 2 naira 50 kobo. 5 naira divided by 2 naira 50 kobo equal to 2 hours. Then component D. Component D, that's 15 naira divided by 2 naira 50 kobo. 15 divided by 2 naira 50 kobo. That's 6 hours. So let us multiply. 2000 multiplied by 1 will give us 2000 hours. 35 multiplied by 2 hours, that's 7000 hours. 2800 multiplied by 6, what do you get? That should be around 15,000. What do you get, please?
16,800.
16,800. Thank you. Add it up. That's 25,800. The total available metal presses hour is 20,000. 5,800 short 4. So in the first requirement of the question, examiner is asking you to determine the insufficiency capacity is available to meet the company's total requirements and to identify the extent of shortfall. So we just answered the first requirement now. We have confirmed that insufficiency capacity is available under metal press for metal presses hour, and the extent of the shortfall is 5,800 hours. So number 2, determine the optimal product mix of the component to be produced, given that only 20,000 hours of pressing time are available. So let's go ahead with our allocation now. So step number 3. So step number 3 is to calculate savings per unit. You know, this question relates to make or buy. Therefore, we've already determined the savings per unit, so there's no need for us to do calculation on that again. That's all you have here. We've determined that. So if that is the case, we move to the next one, which is to determine savings per metal presses hour. Savings per metal presses hour. So components A, B, then D. Savings. So what are the savings? We have 0.75, 1 naira, then 6 naira. 0.75, 1 naira, 6 naira. Then metal presses hour per unit. We have 1, 2, 6. 1, 2, 6. So we need to determine savings per metal presses hour. Therefore, 0.75 divided by 1 equal 0.75. 1 divided by 2 equal 0.50. 6 divided by 6 equal 1. So we need to rank. Ranking. Okay. So based on our savings per metal presses hour, the highest ranking is component D first, followed by A, then B is third. The next item is to prepare the allocation table. Therefore, allocation of 20,000 metal presses time. Okay. There are 3 rankings. 1, rank 2, rank 3. So ranking products or components. Units. Units, the metal presses hour per unit. meter presses hour per unit, total meter presses hour. Okay, cumulative, balance, then OPM, optimal product mix. Okay, so based on our ranking, component D is the highest, followed by A, then B. Units of component D. Component D requires 2,800 units. 2,800. Component A requires 2,000. 2,000, then 3,500 for B. Metal presses hour per unit. D is 6. A is 1, then 2. Therefore, we want to allocate 20,000 hours. So 2,800 multiplied by 6, we got 16,800. 16,800. 16,800 minus 20,000. What do you get as balance? That's 3,200. That's 3,200. So how many units of component D are we going to produce? 2,800. So move to the next one, which is component A. 2,000 multiplied by 1, 2,000. So we have 3,200 left. So 3,002 can accommodate 2,000. 2,000 plus 16,800 will give us 18,800. 18,800 minus 20,000 will give us 1,200. How many units of component A are we going to produce? 2,000. No restriction. Let me rewrite this. 18,800. Okay. Then component B is the last highest ranking. 3,500 multiplied by 2, that's 7,000. Out of 7,000, we only have 1,200 left. So you can't give what you don't have. So I'm going to restrict this one to 1,200. Therefore, 1,200 plus 18,800 will give us 20,000. 20,000 minus 20,000, 0. How many units of component B are we going to produce? That will be 1,200 divided by 2, 600. I'm done with that. Let's move to the final leg, which is to determine the production plan, and at the same time, that's what the examiner asks us to do, production plan. So if that is the case, step 5, move to the next page. Step 5, production plan. That is optimal product mix. So I have units, I have components. Component A, B, D. So for component A, we are producing 2,000 units. Component B, 600. Component D, 2,800. All right, so that's what the examiner asks us to do. So examiner is asking you to determine the optimal product mix of the component to be produced, given that only 20,000 hours of pressing time are available. Then number 3, you have to ascertain whether any of the components will be produced on a second shift operation or bought from outside. So now, before we move to that requirement number 3, do you have Any question on this second requirement we just finished solving? Any questions so far? If there is no question, let's move on to the last part of the question. So the third requirement is asking us if any of the components can be produced on a second shift operation or bought from outside supplier. So to answer that, I would then say second shift operation. Second shift. You will see that component A requires 2,000 units, and we are producing 2,000 units. Component B requires 3,500 units. We are only able to produce 600 units. That means we have a balance of 2,900 on component B. Component D requires 2,800, and we are producing 2,800. So examiner is now asking you if any of the components A, B, or D can be produced on a second shift operation. Since you have satisfied the requirement for component A and D, you cannot produce anything again for those components. That means only component B can be produced on a second shift operation. So examiner wants to know whether that component B, the balance of component B of 2,900 units should be produced on a second shift operation or bought from an outside supplier. So to answer this question, I would then say the total requirements for components A and D have been fully satisfied under normal operation. However, component B requires 3,500 units, but only 600 units will be produced under normal operation. Therefore, the balance of 2,900 units, that is 3,500 minus 600 units, will be produced on a second shift operation. Under this circumstance, now that we have identified that products component B can be produced on a second shift operation, so the most important thing we need to do is to determine the relevant cost of producing the 2,900 units internally and the supplier's quotation. So whichever one that is lower is one we are going to choose. So I would then say determining savings or deficits for the 2,900 units of component B. Therefore, the balance of 2,900 could be produced on the second shift operation or contracted to an outside supplier. Okay. So if that is the case, we need to determine savings or deficits from making components, from making 2,900 units of component B on a second shift operation. Okay. So first item here will be the supplier's quotation. We want to buy 2,900 units at, I will then go to the question, what's the supplier's quotation for component B? Supplier's quotation for component B is 17.75. 17.75. 14.75 rather. 14.75. So what do you have there? Please multiply. 2,900 multiplied by 14.75. What do you have?
42,775.
Thank you. 42,775. So that's supplier's quotation. Then I will compare this with relevant cost of making the 2,900 units of component B on the second shift operation. So we have direct material. $2,900 multiplied by, what's direct material per unit of component B?
6.75.
6.75. Thank you. Here is 6.75. We also have direct labor. Okay. 2,900. What's direct labor per unit?
2 naira.
So 2 naira. So examiner told you in the question that additional information reveals that second shift operation would increase direct wages cost by 25% over the normal shift. What that means is that if you work on second shift operation, direct wages will increase by 25%. So currently, direct wages for component B is 2 naira. So that if you work on second shift operation, that 2 naira will increase by 25%. So 2 naira multiplied by 1.25. So 25%, increase of 25% is the same thing as 1.25. That is 125% divided by 100. All right. So that's for that. Then in the question, we also have direct expenses. What's direct expenses per unit?
5 naira.
5
5 naira multiply. Okay, that's that. So let's multiply. Let's multiply.
Direct material,
Yeah,
19,575. 19,575.
575. Okay. Next one. Two 9 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 1.25.
7,250.
7,250. 2 9 multiplied by 5.
14,500.
14,500. That's not all. Examiner also told us that fixed overhead will also increase by 250 naira at each 1,000 or part thereof second shift hours worked, meaning that for every 1,000 you work on second shift operation or less than 1,000, the company will incur additional fixed overhead of 250 naira each. So for you to be able to do this, you need to know how many hours do you need to produce the 2,900 units on a second shift operation. Once you are able to determine the hours required to produce on second shift operation, then you can then multiply with 250. So that will give you additional fixed overhead to be incurred. So I would then say incremental fixed overhead. We don't know yet. Let's go and compute it. Now, you want to produce, this is my working for fixed overhead. So to determine the fixed overhead, you need to know how many hours do you need to produce. So you want to produce 2,900 units. So you need to multiply with hour per unit. Hour per unit for component B is 2 hours. Multiply by 2 hours. This will give us 5,800 hours. So to produce 2,900 units on the second shift operation, the company will spend 5,800 hours. So examiner now told you in this question that for every 1,000 or less hours worked on a second shift operation, the company will incur a fixed overhead of 250 naira. Therefore, I need to divide this. I need to get my fixed overhead on this. So I know that I have 1,000 in 5,800. That is, how many 1,000 can you see or can you find in 5,800? That's 5,000 hours, isn't it? So that will be 5. That is 5 multiplied by 1,000 hours. Okay. So that's 5. I have 5,000 hours, then multiply by 250. So that 5,000, that is, this one will now be 5 multiplied by 250. So this gave me 1,250 naira. That is, examiner said that for every 1,000 you work on the second shift operation or less, the company will incur fixed overhead of 250. So there is a balance of 800. 1 multiplied by 800 hours. That is 1 multiplied by 250. So this will give us 250. When you add it together, that's 1,500 naira. So this represents the fixed overhead. If I want to do it in the primary, if I want to use primary school method, I will come here to say fixed overhead. So total hours required. Total hours required on the second shift equal to 5,800. So the first 1,000 hours worked on the second shift operation, the company will incur 250 naira. Second 1,000 hours worked, company will incur 250. The third 1,000 hours worked, company will incur 250. The fourth 1,000 hours worked, another 250. The fifth 1,000 hours worked, 250, because I can only find 5 1,000s in 5,800. Therefore, the last one, which is the sixth one, balance of 800 hours worked, the company will also incur 250. When you add up, that's 1,500. That represents the total fixed overhead, incremental fixed overhead. That's that. I believe this is clear enough. So I will then go up there, 1,500. Please add it up. What do you get? What do you get? Yes. What's the total relevant cost?
42,825.
42,825. So what's the difference? What's the difference? That's 50.
50.
50. So meaning that you can see if the company produced the 2,900 units on the second shift operation, the company will incur relevant cost of 42,825 naira. But if the 2,900 units is constructed or is bought from outside supplier, the company will incur 42,775 naira. Therefore, the company should buy the second shift operation of 2,900 units from outside supplier. So decision. The 2,900 units of component B should be bought from outside supplier. Should be bought from outside supplier, as shown in the calculation above. Calculation above. That's it. That's end of the question. This is what the examiner is asking you to do. So let me know if you have any question for me. And we have one more illustration. That will be in our next class by the grace of God. So before we close the class for today, do you have any question for me, please? Any question for me? Okay, so if there are no more questions, I will stop sharing. Some of you have disappeared. No worries. All right then. So in the absence of no additional question, this is where we are going to close it for the day. By the grace of God, next week, Monday, we are meeting again. All right, to complete this topic, then I will introduce you to linear programming. So you have an assignment for me, and the assignment is that you go and study linear programming, A to Z of linear programming, because our first 5 to 10 minutes on that day, by the grace of God, I will ask randomly what you have gained in linear programming. So you have an assignment. Just go and study linear programming. Thank you guys for your time and understanding. I will see you again by the grace of God next week, Monday. Good night to everyone.